So the judge has ruled that those suspensions will not be lifted. As we welcome back into the show Jodi Balsam, Professor of Clinical Law at Brooklyn Law School, who's been giving us some fantastic expertise and insight into this temporary restraining order. Jodi, we have got our result. What is your reaction?
So a number of takeaways. As I indicated before, a win here for the PGA Tour is a bigger win than a win for the LIV Golf players would have been. And here's why. First of all, it takes one piece of leverage out of the LIV Golf arsenal to extract accommodations or settlement from the PGA Tour. Second, it vindicates the commissioner's disciplinary authority here. Commissioner Monahan and the PGA Tour's arrangements for committing golfers to represent it and solely it as a elite golf tour have been somewhat vindicated, and we have to await a full-blown antitrust trial on the merits to determine whether any of those rules need to be a bit more flexible. It also deters other LIV golfers from seeking this kind of relief going forward, right? We've got one strike against that kind of request, in that it depends in part on irreparable harm, and that has been decisively ruled in favor of the PGA Tour, that the LIV golfers here could not establish that they would be irreparably harmed, primarily because of their own conduct in negotiating deals with LIV Golf to anticipate and monetize that harm in the rich deals that they were able to contract. This makes the choice between LIV Golf and the PGA Tour a little more stark for those players who still are contemplating. And I know that you did a brief story on Cameron Scott, who was somewhat circumspect about whether he would be joining LIV Golf. This makes clear that, at least for the moment, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You play for one or the other tour, not both at the same time. And by the way, the PGA Tour is very open about the fact that players have the absolute right to up and leave. They are not signed to long-term contracts or required to agree to competition, to non-compete agreements. They are free to leave the tour and go and play for LIV Golf at any time, and the choice could be made more stark by today's decision. And on a more immediate level, the decision relieves the PGA Tour of having to deal with the inconvenience, the discomfort, the embarrassment of having LIV golfers participate in their first FedExCup tournament this weekend. So I just want to say a couple of things about how this decision actually has some favorable indications for LIV Golf. In the early part of her oral reading of her decision, the court criticized the PGA Tour for the lack of fair process in its disciplinary proceedings. And the commissioner should take that to heart. The tour should take that to heart and adjust those provisions to make them more fair to the golfers. The court also set forth a schedule for this case to go to trial, a very ambitious schedule, and one that notably leads over the stage in a litigation where one party asks the court to simply dismiss the complaint because it has no merit. I think the court made very clear in her comments and in the schedule she presented that a motion to dismiss is a loser, that these parties are going to have to go through discovery, litigate, bring dispositive motions on an evidentiary record, and possibly go to trial.
Jodi,
and I'll break all of this further if you need.
Excuse me, Jodi, in your opinion, does what was ruled today have lasting, in your opinion, value in terms of what's going to happen in the antitrust suit?
Well, it gives an indication of what the parties have to focus on in their discovery, what the court is going to consider important and what bothers the court. But ultimately, if they try this case, they're trying it to a jury. And what they need to do most of all is make the arguments and the narrative comprehensible to a jury of lay people. This was a very smart judge who very quickly understood what was at stake. That's a little bit more difficult in front of a jury. And frankly, the most important strategy the PGA Tour needs to focus on at this point in time is their business strategy, not their legal strategy, because LIV Golf is here. They're going to have to contend with them in the world of professional golf. outside the courtroom, and that's probably the more important imperative at this moment.
Jodi, one area that came up during the hearing that we heard was when looking at the LIV contracts that players have signed, it was actually calculated how much money they would lose by not playing in the PGA Tour and the FedExCup. What did we learn from that undertaking?
Well, some interesting things came out in this hearing, including that the LIV Golf contracts may be deducting against their initial signing amounts whatever amounts the players win in LIV Golf tournaments. That one of the things would be very interesting to find out during the course of discovery is exactly what are the economics of the LIV Golf venture. And that's one of the risks of bringing litigation like this, is that your life is going to have to be an open book. And we're going to learn in great detail exactly what these individual player contracts say and promise and what's promised in return.
Jodi, I know you're an attorney, but you're also a very good student of sports. What do you think the public perception will be now of LIV Golf, and how much has it been changed or damaged?
Well, I think they'll understand more clearly that LIV Golf was attempting to free ride on the PGA Tour's popularity and established audience, that what they seek to do is borrow or retain PGA players who have already generated an audience and a following and exploit that on behalf of a competing tour. I think that's become much clearer to the audience. And it's also going to penalize the players who lost this motion, right? So they lost an opportunity that they clearly thought was valuable. In the public eye, I think they will have gone down a notch or two in respect because it exposed them to the criticism that they made a choice and that they were unwilling to live with that choice. And they used legal chicanery to try to undo that choice, at least in part, and they lost in that effort. So I think it sort of knocks those three players down a notch or two.
Jodi, it's Damon Hack and Eamon Lynch joining this conversation. I spoke to an attorney earlier today who said that he predicted that the players would lose this temporary restraining order, which they have, but he thinks that the LIV golfers actually will win the broader case and that the PGA Tour could potentially be on the hook for extensive damages. Did we see that kind of argument, the groundwork for that be laid by hearing words like strong-arming and different things that maybe that the plaintiffs were trying to lay the groundwork for the larger lawsuit?
So it's hard to identify what these 11 players' damages would be in terms of monetary relief, because they're getting paid a lot more than they would have potentially been entitled to if they had stayed and played with the PGA Tour. And to the extent that this lawsuit is a stalking horse for LIV Golf's interest in recouping some of its investment in the form of antitrust damages from the PGA Tour, well, they're not a party to this lawsuit. LIV Golf is not a plaintiff, and they are not entitled to any remedy unless they bring a lawsuit of their own. So the worst that could come out of this for the PGA Tour in terms of a legal outcome is that they're going to be forced by a court after a trial that establishes some degree of liability to do business differently. Right? There are two outcomes in a lawsuit that are possible here. One is a monetary damage award. As I've said, these are the players who are suing, and they've been so richly rewarded by LIV Golf, it's hard to see where their monetary damages are. But you could also request at the end of a lawsuit like this injunctive relief that prohibits a defendant from continuing to behave or conduct its business in the way that it has been. So one type of relief that the LIV golfers, the LIV 11, may request is that the PGA Tour has to stop enforcing certain rules that prohibit them from playing for both tours.
Jodi, one of the observations the judge made at the end of her finding stood out to me, and it was one of the four prongs of the TRO request that they were required to argue for, and she said that she was not convinced that they had a chance or a substantial chance of winning their case on its merits. How did you read that in terms of the broader antitrust action here? Because it didn't seem like a great vote of confidence from Judge Freeman that the LIV case was particularly well coalesced around a winning argument.
Well, I think that her comments were more equivocal than that. And I think that she, purposely is trying to keep an open mind as to the underlying merits of the lawsuit and allowing the parties the leeway, the space, the time to build their cases. That said, I think she was influenced by the fact that the PGA Tour made a more than adequate, a strong case defending their practices other than the disciplinary process that she criticized.
We've already seen one of the 11 plaintiffs drop out today. Carlos Ortiz, his agent, told Rex Hoggard earlier that he's decided to just move on from this. So we're now down to 10 plaintiffs. You mentioned the idea in discovery that the LIV players' contracts and the particulars thereof would come in under some scrutiny. Is that the kind of thing that you think might dissuade players from getting involved in this kind of litigation? What might actually come out in the discovery process?
Absolutely. And as you noted earlier in your broadcast today, a lot of players have been unwilling to speak to you, to other members of the press about this litigation because everything they say or do is then turned against them in some form in a litigation document. And so I don't blame them for their reticence. And I think that reticence will extend to not wanting to join the litigation. And by the way, why would they need to? They could simply take the LIV Golf deal and make the money and enjoy the lifestyle. The litigation is not essential to their pursuing their careers with LIV Golf.
Okay, well, Jodi, thank you so much for your input. As always, your expertise has been invaluable in the reporting of this breaking news, so we may well be back with you later in the show. Thank you, as always.